If you swallow a small pill every single morning for your blood pressure and you still spend the rest of your day feeling completely drained, watching your waistline quietly grow, or finding yourself short of breath just walking up a flight of stairs, I need you to stay right here and listen carefully, because there is a very real chance that the medication sitting in your cabinet is not doing what you think it is. And in some cases the research is now showing us it may be working directly against you. Before we go any further, if this channel has ever given you something useful, now is the moment to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment below, because your engagement is what keeps this information reaching the people who genuinely need it. I'm Dr. Mercer, and this channel exists to bring you the latest evidence-based research on senior health, simplified and designed for adults over 60. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now, because what I am about to walk you through could completely shift the conversation at your very next doctor's appointment, and that single conversation could change the direction of your health. So let's get into it without wasting another second. Beta blockers. You probably know them by names like metoprolol, Lopressor, or their generic versions, metoprolol and atenolol. These medications have been prescribed for high blood pressure for more than 50 years. Physicians write tens of millions of prescriptions for them every single year. They are inexpensive, they are familiar, and for a very long time they were considered the gold standard for treating hypertension. Here is the problem. The research has moved on, and the medical community has been painfully slow to follow. For many seniors with uncomplicated high blood pressure, no heart attack history, no heart failure, no dangerous rhythm problems, beta blockers are no longer the best choice available, and they may actually be making several things worse at the exact same time. Let me explain what these drugs actually do inside your body, because once the mechanism is clear, everything else in this conversation will fall into place. Your heart has receptors on its surface. Think of them like locks on a door. Adrenaline is the key. When it fits into those locks, your heart beats faster and with more force. Beta blockers work by sitting inside those locks so the adrenaline simply cannot get in. That slows the heart rate and reduces the force of each beat, which brings the blood pressure number down. That sounds perfectly logical. And for very specific conditions, recovering from a heart attack, managing heart failure, treating genuinely dangerous arrhythmias, beta blockers are life-saving medications, and nobody here is questioning that. But for a senior whose only issue is elevated blood pressure, the evidence has shifted dramatically, and the majority of physicians have not caught up with it yet. The turning point came from a landmark study called the ASCOT trial, the Anglo-Scandinavian Cardiac Outcomes Trial, published in The Lancet. It followed more than 19,000 patients with high blood pressure and compared two treatment approaches head-to-head. One group received a beta blocker combined with a diuretic. The other received a calcium channel blocker combined with an ACE inhibitor. The trial was stopped before it was even scheduled to finish, not because of a safety problem with the newer medications, but because the results in favor of the calcium channel blocker group were so clear and so consistent that continuing the trial would have been ethically unjustifiable. The group on beta blockers experienced significantly more strokes, significantly more heart attacks, and significantly more new diagnoses of type 2 diabetes. The calcium channel blocker group had 23% fewer major cardiovascular events. 23%. That is not a rounding error. That is not a marginal finding. That is a result that should have rewritten prescribing habits the moment it was published. Following that study and several others confirming the same pattern from different angles, the United Kingdom's National Institute for Health and Care Excellence formally removed beta blockers from their recommended first-line treatments for hypertension. They are no longer the preferred option in British clinical guidelines. And yet, millions of people around the world remain on them as their primary blood pressure medication, often because a doctor prescribed it years or even decades ago and nobody has ever gone back to revisit that decision. Drop a comment right now. Are you currently taking metoprolol, atenolol, or another beta blocker for your blood pressure? Just yes or no. I genuinely want to understand how many of you this is affecting. Now let me walk you through exactly how these medications may be working against you, and I want to be specific here, because general warnings do not help anyone. The first issue is fatigue and exercise intolerance, and this one carries more weight than most physicians are willing to admit. When you block the adrenaline receptors in your heart, you place a hard ceiling on how high your heart rate can climb during physical effort. For a younger person behind a desk for most of the day, that ceiling may feel completely invisible. But for a 65-year-old who wants to walk the neighborhood in the evening, swim in the morning, or simply keep pace with grandchildren at the park, that ceiling becomes a wall you hit far sooner than you should. Your legs go heavy. Your breath cuts short. Exercise starts feeling like punishment rather than something your body was built to do. And here is where the cycle becomes genuinely damaging. Physical activity is one of the most powerful tools we have for naturally lowering blood pressure over time. So when a medication makes exercise harder to tolerate, you naturally do less of it, and your blood pressure stays elevated anyway. The medication is undermining the very lifestyle changes that would reduce your dependence on it. Harold was 71 when he first came to see me. His fatigue was so profound he had completely stopped his evening walks, something he had done every day for years. He had been on atenolol for 3 years at that point. During those 3 years he had gained 14 pounds, his blood sugar had drifted into pre-diabetic territory, and he described his energy levels as running on half a tank all day, every day, no matter how much he slept. His previous physician had attributed every one of these changes to aging. When we reviewed his medication alongside the current evidence, the picture became impossible to ignore. The second issue is metabolic damage, and this is thoroughly and consistently documented in the literature. Beta blockers increase insulin resistance, raise triglyceride levels, and lower HDL, which is your protective cholesterol, the kind you actually want more of. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that patients on beta blockers had a 22% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to those taking alternative blood pressure medications. For a senior who is already managing blood sugar carefully, or who is sitting in that pre-diabetic gray zone where every decision matters, that is a serious and avoidable risk attached to a medication that is not even outperforming its alternatives on the cardiovascular outcomes that matter most. What genuinely stopped me when I worked through this data is the following. Beta blockers often do bring the blood pressure reading down. The number on the cuff looks acceptable. The physician sees it, nods, and moves on. But that number is not the whole story. The metabolic disruption happening underneath, the rising insulin resistance, the shifting lipid panel, the slow erosion of your energy and physical capacity, none of that shows up in a blood pressure reading. You can display 128/78 on a monitor and still be quietly accumulating harm if the medication treating one number is degrading your metabolic health at the same time. The third issue is fall risk, and this one is critically underappreciated in older adults. Beta blockers can cause orthostatic hypotension, which is a sudden drop in blood pressure when you move from sitting or lying down to standing. That brief dizzy sensation when you rise from a chair. For a 73-year-old, that is not simply uncomfortable. That is a fracture in waiting. Hip fractures in adults over 70 carry a 1-year mortality rate approaching 30%. A medication-induced fall is never just a fall. Before I tell you what the evidence supports as better options, I need to say something clearly, and I need you to hear it as firmly as I intend it. Never stop a beta blocker on your own without direct medical supervision. Stopping abruptly can trigger a dangerous rebound effect where your heart rate and blood pressure spike rapidly, and in some cases that rebound can trigger a heart attack or a serious arrhythmia. Any transition away from these medications must be supervised by a physician and carried out gradually over several weeks. What I am giving you today is information and questions to bring to your doctor. Nothing more and nothing less. Now, what does the evidence actually support as better alternatives for seniors with uncomplicated hypertension? 2 medication classes stand out with consistent clarity. The first is calcium channel blockers, with amlodipine being the most commonly prescribed. The ASCOT data strongly favored this class over beta blockers, and it does not carry the same metabolic risks. It does not place the same ceiling on your exercise capacity. A large analysis published in the British Medical Journal confirmed that amlodipine was associated with significantly lower stroke risk than atenolol in elderly patients with hypertension. The second strong alternative is ACE inhibitors and their related class, ARBs, which stands for angiotensin receptor blockers. Medications in this family such as lisinopril, ramipril, losartan, and olmesartan have shown consistent benefit in senior populations, with protective effects for the kidneys, better outcomes in patients managing diabetes, and a meaningfully lower fall risk profile. ACE inhibitors do cause a persistent dry cough in roughly 10 to 15% of patients. If that is you, an ARB is generally the better choice and works through a very similar mechanism without triggering the cough. Dorothy was 74 when her cardiologist took a careful look at her long-standing beta blocker prescription and made the decision to transition her gradually over 8 weeks to amlodipine combined with losartan. Within 3 months, her fasting blood sugar had normalized. She had lost 7 pounds without making any intentional changes to her diet. And she described feeling like herself again for the first time in years. Her blood pressure readings were actually more consistent after the transition, not less. So here is exactly what to do with everything I have just shared with you. Step 1. Look at your current medications and identify whether you are taking a beta blocker specifically for blood pressure. Not for a diagnosed rhythm problem, not for post-heart attack management, not for heart failure, but purely for hypertension. The names to look for are metoprolol, atenolol, bisoprolol, propranolol, and carvedilol. Step 2. Write down 3 specific questions before your next appointment. Ask your doctor, was my beta blocker prescribed specifically for hypertension and does that still reflect current evidence-based guidelines? Ask, have we evaluated my fasting insulin and triglyceride levels recently? And ask, would I be a candidate for transitioning to a calcium channel blocker or an ARB based on my complete health picture? Step 3. Request a formal medication review. If you have been on the same blood pressure medication for more than 2 or 3 years without any reassessment, you are entitled to ask for one. Many seniors are taking medications that were standard of care 20 years ago and have since been substantially reconsidered by the evidence. Step 4. If any transition is recommended, confirm the tapering schedule with your physician. A responsible doctor will reduce beta blockers gradually, typically over 4 to 8 weeks, and will monitor you carefully throughout that process. Step 5. Begin tracking your symptoms right now. Keep a simple daily log of your morning blood pressure reading, your energy level on a scale of 1 to 10, and your fasting blood sugar if you are already monitoring it. 3 to 4 weeks of your own data gives your physician something concrete and personal to work with, and it makes the conversation far more productive than walking in and saying you do not feel right. One essential clarification before we close, because credibility matters more to me than making a compelling argument. There are absolutely patients for whom beta blockers remain the correct and appropriate medication. If you have coronary artery disease, a history of heart attack, diagnosed heart failure, or certain arrhythmias including atrial fibrillation, the calculation is entirely different. The evidence supporting beta blockers in those conditions is solid and well established. The concern we have walked through today applies specifically to seniors whose only diagnosis is hypertension, elevated blood pressure without an accompanying cardiac condition. If that is you, this conversation is absolutely worth having with your doctor, and you now have the research, the language, and the specific questions to walk into that appointment differently than you ever have before. You deserve a treatment plan built on what the evidence says today, not on what was standard practice decades ago. If you found this useful, please take 2 seconds right now to hit the like button and leave a comment below telling me what blood pressure medication you are currently taking. I read every single response, and your question may shape a future video on this channel. And if someone you care about is struggling with their blood pressure management or simply hasn't had their medications reviewed in years, share this with them today. One conversation, armed with the right information, can genuinely change the direction of someone's health. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Take good care of yourselves.